G'day, I'm Patrick from Douglas Fur Design. Welcome to the Router Bits. I've created a jig to use the handheld router to create a really gentle scoop in the seat of these stools. Now this jig is specifically designed for this circular object, but there's no reason you couldn't design it with some modifications for a square object to do a similar effect. Basically, what it does is you've got these stops underneath, which allows the stool to be locked in place, but still allows the jig to rotate. So the jig will be used like this, with the seat sitting on the table. I've actually put some stops in place on the table too, to stop the whole thing wandering away from me when I'm using it. So that locks in place. The next thing you'll notice are these two rails here. They're just screwed in from the bottom, and they are set so that the distance between them is exactly the same as the base plate on my handheld router, and that's the same the whole way along. So the router can slide between those in a straight line. Now, the most interesting and unique piece of this jig are these two flexible strips. Now I've just used some pine that I ripped down to about 2mm thick, so it's got a bit of flex in it, but it's still strong enough to support the weight of the router. And then I've got these chocks in at either end. And what this does is creates this gentle curve from the high part where this chock is, down to the low part where that rail is screwed down, up to the high part again, and that's duplicated on both of these rails. And so the router will follow that scooping pattern from peak to peak with a low part in the middle. Basically the way this works is it scoops through, you rotate it a few degrees, scoop through, and you do that the whole way around until you've created one consistent divot the whole way around, and then a quick sand will remove any of those leftover routing marks. In terms of setting the depth and so forth of the router bit, you just need to make sure that at its deepest point, at the lowest point in this jig, the router bit is only exposed through the base plate by the amount of the depth you want that scoop to be. So in my case it was about 7mm, and then you want to make sure that at the highest point that router bit is lifting off the seat before it gets to the edge, because you don't want that scoop to continue all the way over the edge. You want to retain that high point around the edge, and you want the scoop to just begin on the inside of the seat. So there's a little bit of trial and error there, but the advantage of this jig is these little height stops can actually be moved in or out to affect the radius of that giant scooped curve to create an either steeper scoop or a gentler scoop, just by moving them in and out and then fixing them in place. So it's really versatile and allows you to kind of adjust the form of that scoop on the piece that you're using. If I was doing hundreds of these stools, I might replace these flexible strips with something solid, but using these flexible strips allowed me to set that curve in a really simple way that allowed those micro modifications to get that perfect profile that I was looking for. That locks in place. I've got a bit of wax on those rails. Just start with the router, start gently scooping that out and rotating it the whole way around. The bit that I found that works really well with this jig is a dish cutting bit. The reason I like that is because it's got these curved edges. You don't have a whole bunch of really sharp lines that might take longer to sand out. So I find that this works really well. This one has a bearing on it. You don't need that bearing on it. You could definitely use a straight bit if you had it, but the lines might be more difficult to remove afterwards with the sander. So with a bit of sanding, comes up really nicely. It's just a 5 or 6 mil scoop in that. Not super deep, but I think it's appropriate for this size stool. You could also use a jig like this for doing some more decorative shapes. If you marked it really carefully, you could turn it by a couple of degrees each time and get a really consistent shape the whole way around. That wasn't what I was going for, but I have noticed before I sand, there's always quite a nice pattern there, so if you wanted to take advantage of that, you could. If you were going to do this on a square object, you'd have to make it so it would slide back and forth. Works really well with a circular object though. Grab a dish cutting bit, grab some scraps of wood, and you can work one of these out for yourself for whatever job you're trying to do. Works really well, it's really simple. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's plenty more videos like this. We're going to keep messing around with this stool for a little while. So you can subscribe below and you'll be notified about them. Otherwise, you can pick up any of these bits at TimberCon. There's a link to their website just down below, or drop into one of their stores in Perth and in Melbourne.